Hi everyone, I'm your host Law of the West, and welcome to another episode of Versus. This time around, I'm going to be comparing the Gladius with the Asperia Blade, and this is a matchup that goes well beyond being a simple comparison between two light fighters. That's because these ships have a rivalry that's actually been woven into the very fabric of the lore that surrounds them, and their conflict is just a footnote in the everlasting war that rages on between the Vandal and the UEE. The goal that I'm trying to accomplish for this series isn't just to throw two evenly matched ships together into a crucible and then letting them fight it out. Although that would definitely be some Thunderdome level entertainment, but if you really think about it, that wouldn't prove anything other than who's the better pilot. So instead, my focus is going to be on comparing these ships' various elements like components, weapons, maneuverability, and what their individual strengths and weaknesses are. And then I'm going to finish things off by discussing why someone would want one of these ships over the other. So this video is intended to be a guide for anyone who's interested in adding either a Gladius or a Blade to their fleet and wants to know more about them and how they compare to one another. And I just wanted to address the elephant in the room right from the start, which is why am I making this video now instead of waiting for the reworked version of the Blade to come out. And there's a few reasons for that. Most likely it's going to be sometime after Squadron 42 gets released, but unfortunately we currently have no idea when that's going to be or how long we're going to have to wait. And the second reason is because I already know all the changes that they're planning on doing to the Blade, and I'll go into more detail about that later on in this video. And third, I actually like the idea of having a living record of how the Blade looked prior to its update. So with that said, let's take a look at the Gladius. The Gladius was developed by Aegis Dynamics and was designed to be a replacement for the aging Stiletto Interceptor. To put things into perspective as to how long this ship has been in active service, it was first introduced into the battlefield during the original Tavaran War, and it's still being currently used in open combat. Generations of pilots have been trained using the Gladius, and it's not uncommon for someone to end up flying a ship that bears the same serial number that their father, and in some cases their grandfather, had also flown. This is because the defining characteristic of the Gladius lies in its versatility. Aegis has a knack for designing their ships to have everything they need in just the right amounts. This makes them incredibly useful under the broadest spectrum of circumstances. Its simplicity is its best asset. It's cheap to produce and easy to repair, and it's an excellent ship to use for training new pilots. All the Gladiuses that are currently being sold under the Mobile Militia Initiative were at one time active military combatants. Most of them have seen action either on the Vandal front or during the Second, and in some rare instances even in the First Tavaran War. But those ships are little more than relics at this point, and have been repaired and re-repaired so many times over that very little of their original chassis still exists. In 2944, the UEE started retiring a bulk of their aging Gladius fleet in order to make room for the next generation of F-7A Hornets. Before being sold, all of their high-tech weapons, equipment, and components were replaced with lower-quality aftermarket gear. But there's nothing stopping a resourceful mechanic from restoring a Gladius back up to its military-grade specs. The Blade is the Vandal's equivalent to the Gladius. They don't have a traditional military in the same sense that the UEE does, but the closest way to describe this ship is being their version of a military light fighter. Vandal strike forces launch their blades in waves that are big enough to create a solid radar signature that completely obfuscates the surrounding area. After the light fighters have been released, their dropships, heavy fighters, and capital class vessels will proceed to move through the swarm hidden in plain sight as they make their approach. The Blade's attacks are swift and blinding. They descend upon their prey without warning, firing on anything that poses even the slightest threat. They'll pillage the area for resources and then disappear before a response team can even be sent out to their location. Reports from the first responders that have personally witnessed the aftermath of these attacks describe them as being both physically and psychologically devastating. Authentic Vandal blades are slightly different from the ones that you see flying around within the UEE. These aren't original Vandal ships, they're replicas that have been built by the Asperia Corporation. The Navy provided the original Vandal ships that Asperia used as templates for building their replicas from. They were then commissioned to mass produce them for the military to use during training exercises. Over time, huge amounts of them have been damaged beyond repair and were sent back to the manufacturer for storage and disassembly. The location of the Asperia boneyard that holds these ships is currently classified, and is rumored to contain thousands of old Vandal replicas, all of which are in various states of disrepair. Asperia has started to use the parts from these wreckages to build a squadron of completely refurbished blades, size, and glaives that have been outfitted for civil defense. This was all part of a controversial program that's aimed at arming people who live beyond the UEE's protection to help better defend themselves against alien attacks. And they did find that there's a kind of poetic irony in letting frontiersmen use the Vandals' own ships to counterattack them with. Asperia has a reputation for creating ships that are painstakingly loyal to the original design. Even their mass-produced products are 100% accurate down to the last detail. The only alterations that have been made to the ships were done to accommodate for the needs of a human pilot. They also update any existing tech and safety features up to UEE standards. And they've installed a transponder so that ships' FOF will register as friendly vessels while flying in monitored space. Although plenty of people still panic as soon as they see a blade get within visual range. None of the Asperia Blade reproductions will be recognized by the other Vandal ships as one of their own, which seems to be one of the most commonly asked questions when it comes to this ship. So let's take a look at these fighters and see how they technically measure up against one another. Both of these ships have the same number of components and all of them are the same size, so neither one of them are going to have any advantages when it comes to their components loadout. So on a 1-to-1 comparison, there's nothing that one of these ships could have that the other couldn't have as well. They're also both outfitted with light armor, which is going to give the most protection while having the least amount of impact on their overall speed. Now, arguably the two most important qualities that a light fighter has would be its weapons and its maneuverability. The Gladius has 3 size 3 weapon hardpoints that can be outfitted with either 3 gimbaled size 2s or 3 fixed size 3 weapons. Fixing the weapons quite literally doubles its DPS, and the Gladius's maneuverability more than makes up for losing the ability to pivot its guns. The Blade, however, has the advantage when it comes to its weapons. It has 4 size 3 hardpoints, which puts it on par offensively with some medium-sized fighters. It also has another advantage. Generally, I tend to shy away from talking about what a ship's default weapons loadout is, and this is mainly because it tends to change so often. But in the case of the Blade, this is definitely worth mentioning. And that's because it comes with 4 Vandal-style weapons that has a look that even matches the ship's uniquely styled aesthetics. Those weapons produce a special type of damage that's classified as plasma. Originally, plasma weapons were able to do pen damage like a ballistics weapon and had unlimited ammunition, so it's kind of a best of both worlds situation when it came to a ship's guns. They've since refactored plasma weapons so that they now do damage over time, which is going to be particularly effective for burning through heavy shields and thick armor. When the Blade originally came out, 2 of its weapons were fixed size 3s while the other pair were gimbaled size 2s. They all had a slow rate of fire and the combined loadout was completely inadequate for PvP, which is a shame because this ship was specifically made for dogfighting. Now it has 4 fixed size 3 weapons. 2 of them are cannons and the others are repeaters that have been split into 2 weapons groups, and their rate of fire has been drastically increased. Now here's one of the changes that's going to be part of the Blade's rework. In the experimental build that introduced the Blade into the game, you were able to swap out its default weapons for any other size 2s or 3s. But most of them would severely clip into the geometry of the ship. And when the build went live, the option to change its weapon selection was locked out and the player was stuck with what it had. The new redesign is going to allow players to choose any appropriately sized weapons that they want to outfit it with, which is going to make it a lot more viable choice to use for PvP. The Blade may have the advantage when it comes to its guns, but the Gladius definitely takes the lead when it comes to its missile loadout. By default, it comes with 2 size 3s and 4 size 2 missiles, but you'll be able to swap out each of its racks for 4 size 1s, 1 size 3, or 2 size 2 missiles. While the Blade has 2 bespoke racks that holds a total of 8 size 1 missiles. This means that you're not going to be able to swap out its default rack with anything else, so you're going to be stuck having to use this particular missile size, but you can swap them out for any other type of size 1 missile. The upside to using size 1s is that they have the quickest lock-on time and they're also going to be the cheapest to replace, so you can feel more free to use them in combat than you would if they were something larger and more expensive. It's also going to potentially have a burst fire missile mode, which is going to allow it to fire a majority if not all of them in a single anime-style barrage. When it comes to overall maneuverability, the Blade is quicker and has a faster afterburner speed, while the pitch-yaw and roll speeds for these ships are both the same. And although this is only going to matter until physicalized damage becomes a thing, the Blade has more hit points and a lot less mass than the Gladius does. So why would you want a Gladius instead of a Blade? One major reason is that this ship plays a pivotal role in the Squadron 42 storyline, and as a result it's been given a lot more attention than any of the other light fighters. It's true that the Blade is also going to be featured in Squadron, but it's going to be playing the part of the antagonist, and we don't even know if it's going to be a flyable ship during the campaign. Another thing is that each light fighter has a kind of ethos behind what it represents and how it's going to differentiate itself from the others, and the Gladius has gained a reputation for being the quintessential light fighter. It's going to appeal to pilots who want to have the most options available to them when it comes to how they outfit their ship and what tactics they're going to use in combat. It has less guns in the Blade, but thanks to the capacitor system, its weapons will have a more sustainable rate of fire, which is going to allow it to press an attack for longer amounts of time. And it'll have the most customization options when it comes to its missiles. So overall, the Gladius is going to be the most balanced out of all the light fighters, and that's what its focus is going to be on. So if that's what you're looking for, then this is definitely going to be the ship for you. So why then would you want a Blade rather than a Gladius? Well, for me, that question is answered just by looking at the ship. I absolutely love the Vandal aesthetic, and out of the entire roster of light fighters, the Blade is one of the most unique looking. It reminds me of what you get if you commissioned H.R. Giger to design a Cylon Raider, and I could almost imagine a xenomorph stepping out of its uniquely styled cockpit every time I see a pilot exit the ship. But beyond that is the playstyle that the Blade represents. By design, Vandal ships are meant to be endurance fighters, and the intention for them is to have more of an advantage the longer that a fight drags on. When two skilled pilots clash in the battlefield, the conflict can last for quite a while, so in those situations the Blade has the potential to become the new meta ship for serious dogfighters. It's slightly faster than the Gladius and is more durable. It also has a much higher alpha strike potential that comes from its 4 size 3 weapon hardpoints and from the damage over time effect that its weapons can do. And one thing that I didn't mention is that, unlike the Gladius, it can fold its wings. This really doesn't save on space that much, but I guess that when it comes to finding a parking spot, every little bit counts. The two main things that have been holding this ship back are not being able to swap out its weapons and the horrible visibility that you get from the cockpit. And I've already talked about what's going on with its weapons. The other thing that's going to be coming along with the rework is a complete overhaul of the ship's windscreen. From the outside, the ship looks amazing, and in some ways I'm really going to miss it, but the view from within the cockpit is absolutely atrocious. It gets even worse during combat if you're pitching the nose of the ship, which will often result in obscuring your view completely. I'm happy to say that they're removing and replacing the windscreen with a bubble dome that has zero obstructions to it. So the Blade's cockpit is going to go from something that a freelancer's pilot would laugh at to being something that would make an Origin owner drool with envy. But I guess they don't drool, do they? Maybe they can have one of their servants do it for them. So despite its current limitations, this is going to end up being a ship that's worth keeping. The unique look of it alone almost makes it worth holding on to. Then when you add the ability to finally mix and match weapons and having an unobscured cockpit view, this is going to go from a non-starter to being a first choice when it comes to dogfighting. Well, that's going to be it for this comparison of the Blade and the Gladius. I do plan on revisiting this matchup after the rework for the Blade gets pushed to the live server, and I'm going to be looking forward to seeing how this video holds up after it does. I'd like to thank everybody for liking these videos because it increases my visibility on YouTube, which really helps the channel to grow. I'd also like to thank my patrons for allowing me to make these videos, because if it wasn't for them and their support, I wouldn't be able to spend the time and the effort that I do in making them. I've been your host, Law of the West. Thanks again, everybody, and take care.